Hey, what's going on, guys? It's Mike for Sim Racing 604, and today I want to talk about a podcast we did recently. Myself and Davey Jones sat down with Ferrariman601. So, Ferrariman601 was a huge influence in why I started this channel in the first place, and continues to be an inspiration with his great content. He's had a sim racing channel for, I think it's going on 9 years, actually greater than 9 years, and we get into that in the podcast and how it became Ferrariman601. He's very opinionated, but at the same time, a very, very nice guy and funny and highly intelligent. So it was a great conversation. And when we started this podcast, he was one of the top on my list to have on the podcast. And I was looking forward to the conversation, and it did not disappoint. So Ferrariman601, it was a great, great podcast, and we look forward to having him back again. So enjoy the podcast. Actually, enjoy this clip, guys. And then there's a link in the description to this video linking to the full podcast. And as always, you can find us on iTunes and Stitcher and Google Play. And thank you guys so much for the support. The podcast is really gaining steam, and we appreciate it. It's been awesome so far. We've had kind of a who's who in the sim racing world so far, and we just continue to get more exciting guests. So it's been amazing. Thanks, guys, for the support. Enjoy this clip, and we will talk to you next time. As I mentioned, you do the live commentary, and it's obviously something that's, a big part of your sort of racing life. Can you talk to us about the season and how things are going? Because something I'm noticing, and I've only been sort of back on the F1 scene for a few years, but it's very much a, three-horse race at this point. Mercedes, Ferrari, Red Bull. There doesn't seem to be many surprises. Like, I don't even really watch qualifying anymore because it seems like every qualifying session is going to end up with, Vettel or Hamilton on top. Last week it was Ricciardo, fair enough, but it just seems like the field has sort of narrowed to a three-dog fight, a three-horse race, whatever your analogy you want to use. Is there sort of any more depth to F1 than that? Or is it just, so much based on technology that it's not open to real competition anymore?
That's a very interesting question. Is there more depth to Formula One nowadays? I mean, the simple answer is yes, of course there is. Formula One is a very complex entity. You have a sporting contest in one side of it. You have a technical arms race in another side of it. And that's always been that marriage of athleticism and technology. That's always been the two primary elements that comprise the Formula One World Championship. However, I'll go out on a limb here, and maybe this will garner some reaction from the audience, but I'll say, Mike, that you're being a little bit gracious in calling Formula One a three-horse race. I would be more inclined to call it a 1.5-horse race, particularly since 2014. Obviously, Mercedes have been winning pretty much everything every weekend, and we're now in the fourth year of pretty obvious Mercedes dominance. In 2018, basically, we have Mercedes. They're clearly the front runners to win both championships again, and Ferrari is there on a good day. Red Bull gets there when they get lucky, as they did in Monaco for a couple of different reasons, obviously, with Ricciardo's engine problem earlier on in the race. But Formula One is at a very critical time if it wants to survive for too much longer. There's been so much of an emphasis, particularly in the last 4 or 5 years, on the engine technology in Formula One, and not just what the engines are and what they do, but the overall impact that the engines have on politics, basically. Jean Todt becoming the president of the FIA, obviously he did miraculous things with Ferrari back in the 90s and 2000s, but since Jean Todt has been in charge of the FIA, we've seen Formula One almost put the racing as a side note to the overall agenda that Formula One is trying to push. Formula One is trying to push two things: road relevance and environmental consciousness. I'm not sure about how the other people out there feel, but when I think about motor racing, I'm not thinking about road cars, nor am I thinking about taking care of the trees. I want to see cars that are fast, look good, sound great, and produce good racing. And to be completely honest with you, I haven't seen the sort of wheel-to-wheel action on a consistent basis in Formula One since maybe 2004. Now, people will say, well, hold on a second, Ferrari was winning everything in the early 2000s, but I'll go out there and say those cars were far more interesting than the ones that are running today. First of all, they looked better. Secondly, they had V10 engines, and they sounded like nothing else on the planet. Nowadays, you watch a Formula One race, you watch a Formula One onboard, you see the driver sitting in there, he's just turning the wheel once to go in and out of every corner. Every once in a while, there's a little moment of a slight twitch of opposite lock because he went in a little bit too fast for the several thousand pounds of downforce the cars have. But for the most part, the drama's all gone. We know who's going to win pretty much 95% of the time whenever you turn on the TV during a race weekend. And ultimately, we know what the outcome of the championship is going to be. It's going to be Hamilton and it's going to be Mercedes again. Not to really take away from what Mercedes have been able to achieve, because obviously the cars that they've been building are spectacularly good. And that comes from their engine side, that comes from their hybrid powertrain side, that comes from their aerodynamic side. And not trying to detract from their achievements, but at the same time, are we turning on the TV to watch a technical demonstration, or are we turning on the TV to watch racing? And I think Formula One needs to decide what it wants to be at this point. Is it a racing series, or is it a showcase for really high-tech stuff?
Right. And it's interesting to hear you say that, because, off the top, we talked about how you're and I think you and I have a sort of similar mind in this fashion. We like to sort of pick things apart and see how they work. And that's actually the hybrid era at the expense of sound has really intrigued me about Formula One, because I find it amazing that they're squeezing 1,000 horsepower out of, a 1.6 liter engine effectively. It has the hybrid system and, of course, a turbo and whatever else. But I find it fascinating. I really do. And it appeals to, and I've said this in the past on the podcast, it appeals to the nerd in me. It really does. Like, I love the fact that they're pushing technology so far. And if it is under the guise of environmentalism or whatever else, I think there is, a technological win there that, again, appeals to sort of the nerd side of me. And, it's just fantastic engineering. So it's interesting to hear you say that you don't really enjoy that. Is it primarily the sound that puts you off the engine, or what is it?
Man, the engines themselves, whole powertrain technology, it is absolutely miraculous what they're able to do with getting 850, 900 horsepower out of 1.6 liters, and then you add the turbo on it, and then obviously the hybrid system. So I would venture to say the Mercedes and the Ferrari, and possibly the Red Bull as well, they're generating well over 1,000 horsepower, hybrid and internal combustion engine combined. And from that side of the world, yeah, it is extremely interesting to see what they were able to do. But the other part of my nerd side is looking back to the 1980s when we had turbo engines with similar displacements. And I remember the BMW four-cylinder getting 1,200 horsepower in qualifying, or the Honda engine sometimes being able to push out 1,400 horsepower in qualifying. There's a great video out there of Gerhard Berger in the Benetton at Adelaide in 1986. He's running 1,400 horsepower at 5.5 bar boost. So that was 1986. And we had these low displacement engines, twin turbos back then, obviously, but they're generating 1,400 horsepower. That's over 30 years ago. So to see Formula One basically in the same territory, using completely different technology, but getting the same result, at least in terms of engine output, I don't see that as progress necessarily. I see it certainly as a very valuable way for the manufacturers, namely Mercedes and Ferrari, to test technologies that maybe later on they want to introduce on the road. And we are seeing road cars starting to generate things that are similar to the KERS systems that we see in Formula One now. But at the same time, it is to the expense of the overall atmosphere. It is to the expense of the excitement that the cars generate. The cars sound closer to diesel locomotives than they do race cars. And for me, that is a big turnoff. It really is. They're not that loud. They don't rev that high. One of the things that really annoys me when we watch the TV coverage is when we see the overlay graphics with the tachometer, it goes up to 15,000 RPM because that's where the red line is per the regulations. But the teams are barely hitting 12,000 RPM because of the fuel flow limits. So it just seems to me that Formula One, it sets itself up always for something that's very interesting, very intriguing, and very spectacular. And then through line item veto, basically, through the regulations that get passed over the years, it just restricts itself needlessly.